And guys, we're back with season 2. We start off with Rick talking to Morgan on the walkie as he's telling them they're about to leave Atlanta. Rick says they lost too many and ends up telling Morgan not to go through the city. As they leave Atlanta, we'll see where the roads take them next. So while they're on the road, Rick tells a story about how they all went to the Grand Canyon, but as soon as they went, Carl ended up getting sick because he was a kid, so they had to turn right back home and leave. But they're not the only ones doing things productive, as Shane teaches Andrea how to fix her gun. As Dell's driving, they end up blowing a casket. So everyone gets out, stops, and looks around. Dell helps teach Glenn how to fix an RV, while Daryl and T-Dog are siphoning cars for gas, and Carol and Lori are doing a little bit of shopping. And things get even better when Shane finds this truck, absolutely full of water. But of course something has to go wrong, so as Rick and Dell look at one walker becomes a horde of walkers. So Rick ends up getting the whole team to hide under the cars, while Andrea has to deal with her own problems by herself, which isn't looking good. T-Dog ends up cutting his arm open, and it almost kills him, but Daryl saves him just in time. But as the horde leaves, Sophia tried to leave too quick, and two walkers end up following her out. She ends up making a run for the forest, so Rick ends up following her. He ends up finding her and takes her to a little tree spot to hide as he takes out the other walkers. But we end up cutting back, seeing that now Daryl is having to look for Sophia because she ended up leaving. So Shane and Glenn end up going back to the group as Rick and Daryl look for Sophia's trail. And they're going through every precaution they can to see if they find any skin or anything in walkers. Even going in and gutting them, which was probably the scariest part of watching this when I was a kid. We see the day's almost over and Rick and Daryl still didn't find her, but Carol's not coping too well to this. So now it's the next morning and everybody's figuring out a plan to find Sophia. So almost all of the team ends up leaving to look for her. As they leave Dell and T-Dog to sit and wait. They end up finding a church thinking that's Sophia ringing a bell, but it's actually just an automatic bell from a church that goes off. But Rick doesn't want the whole team out in the forest looking at dark, so he tells them that they need to split up. So Daryl ends up leading all the other team to leave, as Rick, Carl, and Shane stay to look for Sophia. But as they're walking in the forest, they get a beautiful sight of a nice looking deer. But as soon as Carl takes it in, he and the deer end up getting shot. Who shot Carl? Let's find out next episode. And we see that we're back with episode 2, starting back before the apocalypse started. We see that this is the first time Lori figures out about Rick being in a coma. So they try to figure out how they're gonna tell Carl. And now we're back with Rick running with Carl, as we see Shane and another man telling Rick where to run to. We see that one of the daughters named Maggie ends up seeing Rick at the farm. We see that her dad Herschel comes out and tries to help. He ends up saying that the bullet broke into fragments and that they're gonna have to get it out. And also tells Rick that they need room and they might need his blood later. This man named Otis ends up saying that he went to shoot the deer but accidentally shot Carl on the other side, which actually slowed the bullet down and saved Carl's life. You see back with Dale and T-Dog that T-Dog's infection isn't getting better, and Dale tells him that he's definitely gonna need some stitches. We see that Herschel's actually trying to take out one of the fragments, but Carl keeps moving around too much, but he still gets one of them out. Herschel explains that Carl's moving around too much while he's awake, and he will die if he keeps doing it, so Herschel tells them they need to find some type of thing to knock him out. So Herschel tells them about a college that actually had a pet part that has the same drugs that Carl would need. Rick tries to go, but he's already gave so much blood that Shane says he'll go for him. So Shane and Otis go together. What a start of a day. We see that the other crew is still making it back to the RV, in which Andrea almost gets attacked and almost killed, until that Maggie woman comes in and saves her life. She says that she's looking for Lori, but Daryl says not to go with her. She explains something happened to Carl and told everyone else how to get to the farm. They end up racing back as the other squad ends up making it back to the RV. And of course, as Lori gets there, she's heartbroken. But we see that Shane and Otis finally made it, so they're finally there. The only problem though is that there's a horde of zombies. We see that if Dale wasn't scared of Daryl, that he could have asked him for medicine for T-Dog. And we see that Shane and Otis ended up finding flares, attracting the walkers. They get their attention for a couple minutes, but as soon as it's over, the horde starts following them. They end up locking themselves in an enclosed cage as they try to figure out what to do as the bolt unloosens. And we're back with episode 3. We see that Shane's cutting off all of his hair for some reason. And we can definitely tell this is the future, and we can tell that something definitely bad happened with Shane. So we go back to Shane and Otis running from the walkers as Rick's talking about a story about Shane. They end up actually getting the equipment that they need for Carl, but instead gets stuck. Otis says if he can run for that door, he can find a window to break out of, and then Shane can go out one of the top ones. Otis ends up making it to the door as Shane ends up running his own way. He makes it to the window and shatters it and gets ready to jump. And it seems like from a good distance, but I guess Shane didn't care because as soon as he falls, he rolls his ankle. We see that all the others stay at the RV as Glenn took T-Dog to Herschel's to get stitches. Which we can kind of see Glenn's kind of flirty with Maggie. Anyway, Shane ends up getting out of the place and ends up meeting back up with Otis, while T-Dog's finally getting those stitches he really needs. But we see that the Carl procedure can't wait, so since Shane isn't back, Herschel is about to start the procedure without him. But as soon as that's about to happen, the truck ends up pulling up. But we see that it's only Shane that came back. He tells Rick and them how Otis ended up giving his life for him just so he can make it to get all these things for Carl. But now that we're back at the shower, we see that he actually has a bald spot in his head. And we see it's because Shane shot Otis and left him for dead. And Otis tried to fight back, but Shane got a hold of him as he leaves him there for dead and runs away. And then we see Shane's face as we see he's turning slowly cold-blooded. What's gonna happen next? And we're back with episode 4 as we're at Otis's memorial. We see the RV and all the cars coming to the farm to stay as Carl's finally okay. Of course, everyone asks Shane to say the last words from Otis, so he makes up a story, but we know what actually happened. So we're on the start of the next day. We see that everybody's ready to look for Sophia. Rick ends up saying that he's going to go out and look too, but Herschel says he's already gave way too much blood and he's going to have somebody else do it. Maggie ends up saying that she knows about a store nearby and that she could go alone, but Herschel doesn't want her to. And Rick tells her to take Glenn because Glenn knows a lot about the routes, as Daryl goes on his own ride to look for her, while Rick gets stuck with helping Herschel. And since Glenn's going on a run, Lori asks him to get a couple things from the store. You see that T-Dog and Dell were about to drink out of the well until they seen they had a visitor. Glenn ends up going down to try to fix it, but it ends up going terribly wrong. But they end up getting him out safely, but the water gets contaminated. On the awkward ride to the store, Maggie and Glenn finally make it. But as Glenn's looking for Lori's stuff, he ends up picking up condoms, and Maggie ends up getting a different drift. She ends up saying that he's really bold. And this being Glenn's first time, obviously he takes advantage of it. We see now that it's dark, everybody's back from their runs, seeing what Glenn actually got for her. And she's pregnant, most likely with Shane's baby. What's she gonna tell Rick, and how is Rick gonna take it? Let's find out next episode. And we're back with episode 5, back before the apocalypse. We see that Shane actually did take care of Lori as soon as it happened, but Shane and Lori thinking they're going back into the city isn't happening, and they watch as the city gets blown to pieces. Now we wake up back with Lori, which obviously now we know she's pregnant. They end up making their plans. Daryl goes his own way again. T-Dog and Andrea go together, and Shane and Rick go together. So as Rick and Shane are talking out the forest, they start talking about their old relationships, which ends up being pretty peaceful, until they start getting into if Sophia's alive or not. Shane thinks that she's 100% dead and wants to leave, and Rick says that she's not dead and they want to look. And these two button heads right now isn't looking too good. Daryl takes one of Herschel's horses and ends up finding Sophia's doll near the river. So as soon as he stays on his trail, he doesn't pay attention, but his horse does, as a snake almost bites it. The horse ends up throwing Daryl as he falls all the way back down, landing on an arrow. As he's losing a good amount of blood, he ends up seeing Merle, in which as Daryl keeps climbing up back to where he was, he ends up hearing Merle keep talking crap about him. And as soon as he's about at the top, he gets up there to see that there's no Merle. And since Glenn can't hold it anymore, he spills the beans about how him and Maggie did it, but he also tells them about how Lori's pregnant. We see that they think that they end up seeing a walker, but in reality they just figured out it's a bad looking Daryl. But Andrea was stupid and didn't listen to how Rick said not to shoot, and she ends up shooting Daryl. While Daryl is recovering, everybody ends up eating at dinner, while we can see that everyone does not like to talk. Maggie ends up asking Glenn where he wants to meet tonight, and he ends up writing where he wants to on the paper. But since everyone was in there, of course Maggie couldn't read it, and just now reading that it says the barn. And for some reason she freaks out. And the reason why she acts like that is because they have a barn full of walkers. And the episode ends up ending as Glenn sees all the walkers and sees Maggie. She tells Glenn not to tell anyone, but we'll see how far that gets. And we're back with episode 6, seeing Carl play with the chickens. But we see also that Herschel's family feeds the walkers chickens. Maggie ends up making sure that Glenn didn't tell anyone, in which he doesn't, but he really does want to. It's really scary. Glenn ends up telling Lori that she's getting too skinny and that she needs to start eating. And we see that Carl ends up coming up to Shane and showing that he stole Daryl's gun. So they end up making a firing range so everybody can learn how to shoot. Come on, bro, you don't have to be a thug in front of T-Dog. You see that Dale actually figures out how Herschel sees the people. He says that he sees the walkers as humans that are just sick. And he says to Dale that they should be leaving soon. And of course Dale can't keep his mouth shut, because while he was cooking, Lori ends up walking away. And Dale tells a story about how his wife was pregnant and hated the smell of food. We see as Glenn's making the fire stronger, Lori asks him for another set of things to get. So him and Maggie go out for another run, which she doesn't seem like she likes too much. As soon as Maggie almost gets Lori's stuff, she almost gets attacked by a walker though. But Glenn saves her just in time and shows how dangerous they really are. Maggie runs up to Lori pissed, saying they're not running their errands and they're definitely not getting her abortion pills anymore. We end up seeing Rick walk up to Lori, probably knowing what's going on. He starts off with saying, "Why?" Because apparently she ate those pills that Glenn gave her, but she ended up throwing them up. Lori says she screwed up and she's really sorry. And Rick is only mad because she says that she doesn't want to bring a kid into this life. So we see that this relationship ain't doing too well right now. And we're back with the mid-season finale. As everyone's chilling out and cooking, Glenn ends up getting up randomly and telling everyone that there's walkers in the barn. Shane ends up saying that they need to leave or take out the walkers, and Rick says they can handle themselves. As we definitely see that Rick and Shane are getting way worse. And it seems like Maggie and Glenn are ended up talking more, but it seems like Maggie's still mad. Since Rick keeps hearing from the group that Herschel's trying to kick him out, he ends up talking to him. He ends up saying that Lori's pregnant and they can't leave or they will die. And that's where Herschel says he'll give them a couple weeks, but they have to go on their own eventually. Which Rick really doesn't want, because he knows if he has a kid out there that he will die. Shane keeps saying that they need to leave, but Rick says they can't go anywhere because Lori's pregnant. After hearing Herschel and Rick talk, Maggie explains to Herschel that the walkers aren't sick people because Glenn saved her life and she wants them to stay around. Shane ends up looking for the guns so he can take out all the walkers, but ends up figuring out that they're gone. and I think he definitely knows where they're at. We see that Herschel finally shows how they got all the walkers in the barn, and we see that Dale was trying to hide the guns from Shane because he didn't want anything going down, in which Dale just calls him a piece of crap and gives him the guns. But as soon as Herschel and Rick and them bring back those walkers, no one's having it. So Shane breaks the lock to the farm door and ends up letting the walkers out. As everyone takes out all the walkers, one more walker comes out, sadly, that our team didn't want to see. Time they were looking, Sophia was in the barn, and everyone's devastated. Rick has to put her down, and that's how we end the mid-season finale. I'll see y'all next time.